These are some of the most disturbing indie video games ever made. We'll start with the more well-known, controversial and weird indie games and dive deeper into the most bizarre and illegal ones. Let's start with the level 1. Postal 1 was made by a small, independent studio called Running with Scissors, and it was published in 1997. You play as a guy known only as the Postal Dude, and mentally, let's just say, he's not in a good place. The game starts with him getting kicked out of his house. He believes everyone in the world has gone crazy because of a disease called the hate plague, and he is the only one unaffected by this. So, he needs to cleanse the town with mass violence. The main goal of the game is to take down a certain number of enemies while staying alive. These enemies are civilians, police officers and soldiers. The Postal Dude sees everyone as an enemy. He goes insane as you progress. The voices and whispers in his head get louder and louder. The game makes you feel his paranoia firsthand. You start with a pistol and find other weapons like shotguns, flamethrowers and even rocket launchers. The combat is quick and intense, with civilians and enemies screaming, running and reacting in real time to the chaos he creates. You go through different areas like his neighborhood, a mine, train station, trailer park and a military base. Then you reach an elementary school full of little children, but your weapons don't work against these kids. They all laugh and Postal Dude's mental state gets even worse. The screen fades and the game reveals that he has been captured and locked in a mental asylum. And the last thing you hear is disturbing whispers and demonic screams. But in the HD remake version, the ending of the game was changed to a funeral scene, and some fans of the game theorized that this was the funeral of Postal Dude's child, and the entire game is a result of his breakdown. Now, Postal 1 had an excuse for its violence, but the developers of Hatred probably just said, let's make a mass murder simulator. Hatred was developed and published by a Polish studio called Destructive Creations, and if you're expecting a complex narrative, you won't find it in this game. Hatred's story is intentionally empty. The character you play doesn't even have a proper name. The game just refers to him as the antagonist. He just delivers a dark monologue at the start of the game about how much he hates humanity and society. So he decides to kill as many people as possible in New York, and that's it.
I just fucking hate this world and these human worms feasting on its carcass.
The game is almost completely black and white, and the only colors you see are from blood, fire and explosions. And one of the most infamous things about the game is its close-up and detailed executions. Similar to Postal 1, the core gameplay loop is about making sure that the main character reaches his goal of mass killing. At the end of the game, you even blow up a nuclear power plant. Because of all this, some critics and players argued that Hatred glorified mass murder and trivialized real-world violence. But the developers defended their work by saying it was a reaction to political correctness in gaming industry. Hatred was controversial even before its release. Shortly after being submitted to Steam Greenlight in December 2014, Valve removed the game because of its violent content. But after backlash over censorship, Gabe Newell, the president of Valve, personally brought it back and apologized to the game's developers. And since then, Hatred remained available on Steam, and it even got an Xbox One port in 2020. Pico's School was released in 1999. It was made by Tom Falk, the creator of Newgrounds, and it became a cult classic and shaped the entire Flash game scene. At first glance, it looks like a simple cartoon shooter, but the inspiration behind it is what made it controversial. The game was released just 3 months after the Columbine High School massacre. Inspired by that tragedy, the game drops you into a school under attack by a group of outcasts. You explore the school and fight with gang members. Each gang member acts as a boss fight, and at the end of the game, it reveals that Cassandra, the gang's leader, is actually an alien. And to stop her, you have to shoot her in a specific weak spot. Given the timing of its release and its graphic depiction of school violence, Pico's School immediately met with controversy. Parents and media called it tasteless and irresponsible, but none of that stopped it from becoming a classic Flash game. Despite, or maybe because of the backlash, the game exploded in popularity. Imagine waking up in a perfect 1950s town with friends and neighbors, but something is off. It's like the whole town is wearing a mask. That's Harvester, a 1996 classic horror game developed by a small studio called DigiFX Interactive. While it plays like a traditional adventure game with things like clicking on locations, objects, and people, it quickly becomes something else. The game forces you into graphic violence to progress, and with its weirdly uncanny visuals of pre-rendered 2D backgrounds mixed with digitized actors, everything feels unsettling. You play as Steve Mason, a young man suffering from amnesia, waking up in a town of Harvest in 1953. He doesn't remember anything, not his past, not his family. And the people in town act weird. The things they say feel unnatural. Everyone in the town says that Steve is engaged to a woman named Stephanie Potsdam. So Steve goes and meets her, and he learns that Stephanie also has no memories of her past. They become lovers and look for a way to escape this place. But then things take a darker turn. If you don't want spoilers about the ending of the game, you can skip to the timestamp on the screen. Now, at the center of town, there is a building called The Lodge, and it's controlled by a cult named Order of the Harvest Moon. If Steve wants answers, he has to join the cult, but the entrance is not free. He must complete a series of tasks assigned by the lodge keeper. At first, they seem harmless, but then they force Steve to do a lot of darker things. One day, Stephanie disappears. You find out that she's in the lodge, and you finally get inside. There are rooms called temples, and people inside these rooms give Steve weird puzzles to make him reject traditional morality. They teach things like charity is meaningless and old people are disposable. You even see a room that looks like a kitchen, where a chef prepares human meat. And when you reach the ending, you learn that nothing was real. Everything in the town was all part of a simulation except Steve and Stephanie. The rest was part of an experiment by scientists in the 90s to test if it's possible to turn normal people into serial killers. Here, Steve is given two final choices. He can kill Stephanie and return to the real world as a killer, or he can choose love and stay with her, living the rest of their lives in Harvest. Now we're on to the level 2 of the iceberg with games that triggered outrage and made headlines. In 2004, a small Scottish studio called Traffic Games released something that instantly became one of the most controversial video games ever made, JFK Reloaded. This wasn't just another historical shooter, it was a first-person simulation where you stepped into the shoes of Lee Harvey Oswald and recreate the assassination of President John F. Kennedy as precisely as possible. Your goal is to match the official Warren Commission's version of events down to the millisecond. The more accurate your shots, the higher your score is. Developers of the game try to disguise it as an educational experience. They claimed that the game would help people to understand the physics behind one of the most infamous assassinations in history. Politicians, media, and the general public called it tasteless, disturbing, and disrespectful. News stations ran sensational headlines about a game that let you roleplay as JFK's assassin, and some US lawmakers even pushed to get it banned outright. But perhaps the most crazy part is that the developers held a competition where players could win up to $100,000 if they managed to recreate the shooting with near-perfect accuracy. So obviously, this thing made the game's controversy skyrocket even further. Released in 1995 for the Super Famicom by a tiny studio called Happysoft, this obscure, janky shoot-'em-up game has gone down the history for all the wrong reasons. At first glance, the gameplay is simple. You control a guy named Chin, supposedly a relative of Bruce Lee, blasting through endless waves of enemies. But the game's difficulty is extremely high, and if you get hit even once, it's game over. And just to make things even more punishing, the game never ends. It just loops infinitely. The visuals are a complete mess. Chin isn't even an original character. He is literally a pixelated image of Jackie Chan. Backgrounds are just stolen assets, and the entire thing is set to a blaring, endlessly looping Chinese propaganda song that drills into your skull. Set in 1997, the year Hong Kong was handed back to China, the game follows Chin as he is hired to fight off an invasion and take down the so-called Ultimate Weapon, a zombie version of former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. The game's tone-deaf depiction of Chinese people and its reckless use of political figures already made it controversial, but Hong Kong 97 crossed a much darker line, its game over screen. Instead of a simple try again message, players were greeted with a horrifying real-life photo of a dead body. No explanation, no censorship, just pure shock value. This disturbing imagery turned an already bizarre game into an urban legend. Few games have ever gained as much controversy as Super Columbine Massacre RPG, and for good reason. Released in 2005 by a solo developer, Danny Ledon, this indie RPG puts players in the role of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the two perpetrators behind the Columbine High School Massacre. It was built with RPG Maker 2000 and it has a pixelated, retro look of a classic role-playing game. but its subject matter is anything but nostalgic. Players navigate the day of the attack step by step, starting with planning, gathering weapons and planting bombs, all leading up to the shooting itself. What makes it even more unsettling is the detail. Dialogue is pulled straight from the shooter's journals and video footage. Real photos and audio clips are everywhere. After the massacre, Eric and Dylan descend into hell, where they fight their way through a bizarre lineup of characters, including historical figures like Oppenheimer and John Lennon, alongside fictional ones like Pikachu and Homer Simpson. And the final boss is Satan himself. And as if the game wasn't already controversial enough, it ends with a press conference at the school, using actual footage from the real-life events. At first, the developer initially released the game anonymously, and revealed himself later. He defended the game as an attempt to explore the factors behind the tragedy: bullying, alienation, and the killer's warped mindsets. He insisted it wasn't about glorifying the shooters, but the public wasn't having it. The media went wild, using the Super Columbine Massacre RPG as fresh fuel in the never-ending debate about whether video games promote real-world violence. It's been banned in multiple places, and even now, nearly 2 decades later, it remains one of the most infamous and disturbing games ever created. Now we are entering the level 3 of the Iceberg. Released in 2003 by an indie developer called Petrula Entertainment, this low-budget FPS was exactly what you expect from an era where the Iraq War dominated the headlines. You play as an unnamed American soldier, shooting waves of Iraqi enemies with clunky controls and some of the worst AI imaginable. Enemies just run straight into your bullets and they shout badly translated, stereotypical Arabic phrases. Then there is the final boss, Saddam himself. You just shoot him and that's the game. But Quest for Saddam's biggest controversy didn't come from its release. It came 3 years later in 2006, when the global Islamic media front took the game and reskinned it into something called Quest for Bush. This time, you play as a jihadist, fighting your way through American troops in one-to-one reskin of the original game. And instead of Saddam, your new target is President George Bush. V-Tech Rampage was released just 3 weeks after the Virginia Tech massacre in 2007. It was created by an Australian developer named Ryan Lamburn. You play as Sang Hee Cho, the real-life shooter, and the entire game is just you reenacting his attack on the university. The graphics and the gameplay are pretty simple. You just run through the school, gunning down students and teachers while avoiding the police. News stations lost their minds over this thing. Families of the victims were outraged and websites banned it immediately. Most developers, when faced with overwhelming backlash, either apologize, stay quiet, or just try to disappear. Not Ryan Lamburn. He doubled down. Rather than defending the game, he made fun of the outrage. And he even tried to profit from it. He demanded $1,000 to remove it from Newgrounds, $2,000 to take it off his own site, and for $3,000 he would apologize. So it was clear that the game was made for profiting of a real-life tragedy. Released in 2002 by National Alliance, a literal white supremacist organization, this game wasn't just trying to be offensive, it was just an extremist propaganda. Now calling this a game is generous. It's barely functional, even by early 2000 standards. It's a first-person shooter, and you play as either a KKK member or a skinhead. And you run through 2 awful-looking levels where your goal is to eliminate African Americans, Latinos, and Jewish people. And the final boss is none other than Ariel Sharon, the former Prime Minister of Israel. The entire game is covered in extremist symbols and imagery. Even the game's release date and price were meant to send a message. It was released on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and it was sold for $14.88, a direct reference to 14 words slogan used by white supremacists. Major news stations criticized the game, and people were concerned about how games could be used as tools for spreading extremist ideologies. But ethnic cleansing was never available in places like retail stores. Instead, it was sold with racist music and literature in underground websites and communities. Back in 2013, a random post popped up on X, or the paranormal board of 4chan. The user claimed that they had found something weird at a tech expo. Among a bunch of normal CDs, there was a disc with a mysterious game called Station.exe, built in Blender by an unknown developer. just a name and a file. Right away, station.exe drops you into a pitch-dark, abandoned facility with unsettling ambient noise. The whole place feels wrong. As you start walking through the building, you realize that you're not alone. These massive, floating, lifeless human faces start following you. They don't move like normal enemies, they just hover, completely still until they are suddenly not. And if they catch you, you die. The game doesn't give you a game over screen or a reset. It just shuts itself down. But at one point, some players discovered GPS coordinates hidden on a wall inside the game. And these weren't just random numbers, they led to a real place. Specifically, an abandoned diamond mine in Russia, and the structure of the mine closely resembles the facility inside the game. Now, this is where the mystery really picks up. The mine is a restricted area, so nobody could just walk in and check if the game was referencing something real. But if this was just a weird, random, obscure game, why would it point to a real abandoned site? And it doesn't stop there. When players started digging into the game's files, they found even stranger stuff like a link to a password-protected website and references to old posts from 4chan's keyboard, which, if you don't know, is the weapons board. So now you have a mysterious game that's pointing to a real abandoned location with connections to weapon discussions and a hidden website that no one has been able to access. Now imagine a visual novel that takes the psychological horror of Saw and mixes it with some deeply unsettling themes and cranks the intensity up to about 1000. That's Euphoria. Originally developed by Clock Up, a Japanese studio known for making adult titles, Euphoria isn't just your typical point-and-click, branching path visual novel. At first glance, it looks standard enough. You make choices, shape the story, and interact with different characters. But once you start playing, it becomes very clear that this game is operating on an entirely different level of disturbing. You take on the role of a character trapped inside a mysterious facility, along with a group of women who are being forced to participate in twisted, sadistic games by an unknown game master that force them to do things that are pretty uncomfortable to watch. Now, I could go into detail about the exact games being played, or what happens to the characters and how the plot unfolds, but I don't want to spoil it for you and also break the YouTube TOS. There's a lot of emphasis on power dynamics, manipulation, and what happens to the human mind when it's pushed beyond its limits. And while that all sounds like something deep, just know that the way it's presented is so extreme even within the adult gaming community. That being said, Euphoria has built up a loyal fan base, specifically among players who appreciate its deeper psychological themes, but its graphic nature made it a nightmare for distribution. Some releases had to be heavily censored, with certain versions removing or modifying content just to be legally sold. Meanwhile, special patches were released to restore everything the developers originally intended. Released in 2008 by a mysterious solo developer known only as 237, Demonophobia is a side-scrolling survival horror game that drops you into a literal nightmare. You play as Sakuri Kunikai, a 14-year-old who wakes up in a dark, fleshy, blood-stained hellscape with no idea how she got there. When she steps outside, she is immediately attacked by monsters. You don't get any weapons, you can't fight back, your only goal is to survive. And the game is really difficult, forcing you to learn through trial and error, and you will die. A lot. Dying in Demonophobia isn't just a quick game over screen. Every time Sakuri fails, the game forces you to watch as she meets an incredibly graphic and horrific end. Every single death animation is grotesque, excessive, and deeply uncomfortable to watch. It's not just the usual horror game gore either. They even force her to do things that are way too extreme. And to make it even worse, the game has zero sound, no dialogue, no music, no sound effects, just pure silence as you navigate this grotesque nightmare. Naturally, Demonophobia became infamous, but not just for its brutality, but for the fact that it was doing all of this to a young teenage girl. Even in the world of extreme horror games, this was too much for a lot of people. For years, nobody knew much about 237, the mysterious developer behind the game. But in 2021, they finally stepped forward and revealed themselves in a Japanese website as the creator of Demonophobia and its cancelled sequel, Xenophobia. And to prove it, they even released previously unseen beta files from the games. And as of now, they are still active in game development. Now we are on the level 5 of the iceberg. 177 is a Japanese game that was released in 1986 by DB Soft under the name Macadamia Soft. Now you might be wondering, what's up with that number? It's a direct reference to Article 177 of the Japanese Penal Code, which criminalizes sexual violence. You can probably guess what kind of game this is. The entire premise revolves around chasing down a woman in a side-scrolling environment. In the first section, you, the player, must prevent the girl from reaching her home and dodging obstacles like stones, barriers, and even animals like dogs and turtles. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. If you manage to catch her, the game transitions into a full-on simulation of the crime, where the player inputs commands to match the character's actions, and the goal is to satisfy the girl. If you fail, you get arrested, but if you succeed, you are rewarded with one of the most disgusting conclusions imaginable. The girl marries the main character, and yeah, that's the win screen of the game. Now you might be wondering, how did this get even released? Even in the anything goes era of 1980s gaming, 177 was too much. The game was banned almost as soon as it hit store shelves. It became one of the first video games ever pulled from the market due to its content, and the developers never tried to re-release the game, no ports or remakes. It's been buried deep in gaming history. LostBoy.exe first popped up on 4chan's paranormal and video game boards back in 2012. Just a random, creepy game floating around with the name Rob attached to it as a supposed developer. The game itself is pretty simple. You wander through a maze-like environment filled with satanic imagery and distorted religious paintings staring at you from the walls. Classic eerie, lo-fi horror vibes. A little weird, a little disturbing, but nothing too wild. As LostBoy.exe started getting passed around, someone with bad intentions decided to mess with it. They took the game and injected it with a remote access Trojan and re-uploaded the game. So if you downloaded the wrong version, you weren't just getting a creepy indie game, you were unknowingly installing a virus that gave a hacker full access to your computer. They could dig through your files, turn on your webcam and steal your personal data without you even realizing it. And the game became infamous for that. Now fast forward to 2023, more than a decade later, and this mystery finally got some answers. A French YouTuber named Feldup managed to track down Rob, the original creator of LostBoy.exe, and talk to him. And according to Rob, he was once part of a small group of indie developers, which allegedly included the creator of Risk of Rain. LostBoy.exe was just a side project, something made purely to be scary and simple. A banned furry roleplay group from 4chan apparently wanted to get revenge from the site and re-uploaded the game with a virus. Splatter School is a Japanese 2D side-scroller horror game developed by Ankoku Marimokan. And if you ever played Splatterhouse, this is basically its hentai parody version. You play as Jessica, just your average high school girl, who takes a nap and wakes up to find her entire school has transformed into a nightmare, because apparently the principal read a cursed book, which in classic horror fashion, sacrificed everyone and unleashed a hellish nightmare world. The gameplay is pretty straightforward. You run, jump, explore the school, solve puzzles and beat enemies with whatever weapons you can find. So it's similar to Demonophobia, which we covered earlier in the previous level. But in Splatter School, if you take damage, a piece of her clothes disappears. And if you keep getting hit, she ends up completely naked. Because of course, that's a necessary game mechanic. And it doesn't stop there. When you die, you are treated to some of the most violent and grotesque death scenes imaginable. Splatter School has over 50 different ways to die, and it makes sure that you see every detail. All the gore, death scenes and the high school girl ending up this way made the game controversial. The story of Kamikushiki Village was released in 1995 for the PC 98, and if that name doesn't ring a bell, you might recognize the developer, Happysoft, the same company who made Hong Kong Night 7. In this game, you don't play as some random fictional villain, you play as Shoko Asahara, the real-life leader of Aum Shinrikyo, the doomsday cult responsible for the Tokyo subway sarin gas attacks in 1995. The game literally puts you in charge of one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in modern Japanese history. It's like a strategy simulation hybrid, but instead of managing a city or leading an army, you're building a death cult. Step by step, you recruit followers, collect funds, train cultists, and even level up Asahara himself. There's a countdown clock in the game, and as time passes, real-world events happen just as they did in actual history. And the game has two endings. If you successfully make the gas attacks happen, you win. But if you don't, the world ends. But what makes this game make it into the list is that the game incorporates real footage from the cult's propaganda, like actual clips of Asahara, his followers, and even the attack itself. So when people first found this game, they were horrified. Many people thought it was an actual propaganda tool created by the cult to recruit new members. But in reality, it wasn't. The game was actually meant to be satirical, a dark, over-the-top critique of Aum Shinrikyo, portraying the cult and its leader in goofy ways. But still, there was a huge backlash in Japan. The country was still healing from the attack, and this game dropped just 3 months after the tragedy. So even though it was technically anti-cult, it was still seen as insensitive and incredibly offensive. Level 6. The bottom of the iceberg. Rootpain.wat is a Doom mod released in 2013 by a mysterious modder known as Zygo. It starts in a disturbing, fleshy environment, like somehow you've been swallowed by something alive. The walls and floors pulse like organic tissue, while red blood cells float through the air. When you check the in-game map, you see the level name, Womb. And the layout of the map resembles a female reproductive system. And that's not all. Instead of being labeled as Doom player, your character is called Parasite. And then there is the fetus named Zygo, a reference to mod's creator and the word zygote, the earliest stage of human development. And your goal is to destroy 2 organ-like structures, and they are very obviously designed to look like ovaries. When you destroy one of them, you suddenly hear a woman's scream echo through the level. Then a fetus-like creature appears, and no matter what weapon you use, it won't die the normal way. But if you type in Doom's MDK cancel command, which instantly kills any enemy, you get an on-screen message that says you have successfully aborted the child. And if you try quitting the game, you'll be seeing a final message: long live the unborn. At this point, you're probably wondering, what is this mod even trying to say? And honestly, nobody really knows. Some people believe that it's a commentary on abortion, but Zygo has never explained its deeper meaning, so all we're left with is a disturbing Doom mod. Nobody knows who made this game. No developer name, no credits, nothing. Just a creepy message at the start that says this game was made by a demented person, and that message might be the most truthful part of the entire experience. You start in a blood-red hallway with disturbing floating text scattered all over. And these are not just random horror phrases, they slowly reveal the mindset of the character you're playing. The messages say that your character has always fantasized about committing the crime that I can't say in this video. Not just the girls at his school, but to his own mother. And then it gets worse. You keep walking until the game bluntly tells you that he murdered his own mother and did the crime. After this revelation, you are forced to descend into a long, dark pit, and when you finally hit the bottom, you see a picture of a woman with her head missing. Clicking on the picture takes you to a room where the mother's corpse is already decaying, and the game gives you a very specific action to perform with the body. Then the game throws you into a white room and asks, are you a psychopath? There is no option, so you have to pick yes. And once you do, the game shows you some of the most graphic and disturbing images I've ever seen in my life. After you see these images, you walk through a door and the game asks, did you have fun? Then it wants you to grab a piece of paper, write down I'm having fun, and take a picture of it, with your face if you want, and send it to an email address. And some people actually did it. They wrote I'm having fun, took pictures and sent it to this unknown person. These submissions even made their way online. To this day, no one knows who received those emails or why. On the surface, UAC Labs looks like just another custom Doom map. You run through hallways, shoot demons, and collect keycards. You know, the usual stuff. But what makes this one make it to the iceberg isn't the map itself. It's who made it. Eric Harris. As I have mentioned before, Eric Harris is one of the 2 teenagers responsible for the Columbine High School massacre in 1999. Before the shooting, Harris was obsessed with Doom. He talked about it in his journals, he used the name rap in online Doom communities, and he even made and uploaded his own custom levels, and UAC Labs is one of them. But UAC Labs is just a regular Doom level. There is nothing that much disturbing about it. It has the same stuff you would find in any other 90s custom Doom map, but after the Columbine shooting, theories started spreading. Some people believe that UAC Labs was modeled after Columbine High School, and Harris used it for practicing the attack inside Doom. But as shocking as that sounds, there was never any actual proof to back it up, so it was mostly speculation. But of course, that didn't stop the media from going into full hysteria mode. After the attack, video games became the perfect scapegoat, and Doom was enemy number one. They all pointed to Harris's love for Doom as evidence that violent video games were turning kids into killers. It didn't matter that millions of people played Doom without ever hurting anyone. Harris was obsessed with it, and that was enough. A mysterious deep web horror game filled with disturbing sounds, hidden messages, and even illegal material. Sad Satan first made waves in 2015 when a YouTube channel called Obscure Horror Corner claimed that they found it on the deep web, and that's when the legend started. But what is Sad Satan? It's not really a game in the traditional sense. There is no story, no objectives, no puzzles, no enemies to fight. You just walk through endless, claustrophobic hallways, completely drenched in black and white. The deeper you go, the worse it gets. You hear loud, distorted screams of children, some music playing in reverse, and even a slowed down edited speech from Hitler. And just when you think it can't get any more unsettling than this, the game hits you with full screen images of some of the most disturbing things imaginable. Not just serial killers and criminals, but real-life predators and victims. And then there is the uncensored cyberpunk images. Yeah, those ones. The developer is unknown, and the original file is nowhere to be found, and the deep web link didn't work. In an interview with Kotaku, the channel's owner said that he misdirected people on purpose from downloading the game because of its graphic content, but that didn't stop the internet. Clone versions claiming to be the real Sad Satan started appearing on places like 4chan, and some of these were worse than the original, with even more illegal imagery and viruses hidden in the files. Even after all these years, nobody truly knows the full story behind Sad Satan. It remains one of the most disturbing and unsettling pieces of internet horror ever created. And that was the most disturbing indie games Iceberg. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. This is my very first YouTube video, and if you wanna support me, consider subscribing and liking the video. Until next time, see ya.